All right, good morning. Let me tell you where we are right now. I'm trying to get the rest of the material to you. It's going to take 2 more videos. It may take 3, this being one of them. So we're going to try and film them all today and just put them online, and you can watch them whenever. I've sent you a huge packet of information, which is all the practice problems, the tests, the quizzes, and all the keys to go with them. So any questions that you have on assignments, you can just text me through Remind, and we'll try to get through this. After next week, I'm going to start sending you AP practice tests, so you can get into the mindset of that. Now, the AP practice test is going to be 2 questions. One's going to be a long format question, one's going to be a short format question. The long format encompasses multiple topics. The short one usually just sticks to 1 or 2 topics. And we're not doing foreign exchange, so unfortunately that won't be covered on the exam. The practice test that I'm going to give you will be not only free response but also multiple choice, because when you're working the multiple choice questions, you really start to lock in how this is all operating together, and they're asked in such a way so it forces you to draw graphs, to draw cause and effect, and see what's happening. So it's just extra practice for you to bolster your skills for this. But anyway, here we go. We're going to start today with talking about consumption and savings. We're going to move into monetary and fiscal policies, and that should pretty much take it through the end of the semester. All right, here we go. Yesterday we talked about disposable income. And disposable income, of course, is your net after taxes. Yeah. And you have 2 options. You can spend it or you can save it. So we call that our marginal propensity to consume and our marginal propensity to save. We're either going to spend our money and we're going to save our money. And because those are our only 2 options, those propensities to consume and save have to add up to 1. So remember, that brings in our spending multiplier. So let's just say that our propensity to consume is 75% and our propensity to save is 25%. Right? So what's our spending multiplier? Well, how many times will 25 go into 100? The spending multiplier is 4. And that's how fast money's moving through the system. But because remember, every time you spend money, whoever you're giving your money to is going to spend that money. And whoever they give that money to, they're going to spend that money. So very, very similar to the way the banks create money, the spending multiplier sends the money through the system. So kind of redundant, but what are 2 things you can do? You can consume or you can save. That's it. That's what you got your choice of. List all the things you can think of that would cause people to consume more and spend less. So those are those 4 topics we talked about yesterday. If their expectations, and when I say they, I'm talking about the consumer, if the consumer's expectations are high, they're going to spend more. If you think you're going to be getting the job that pays a lot, you're going to start spending more. If you think the whole economy is doing really well, you're going to start spending more. If your taxes are low, and that just is by default, if you're giving the government 50% of your paycheck, you don't have the money to spend. If you're giving the government 10% of your paycheck, you've got the money to spend. How much money you have, the wealth effect. If you have a lot of money, you're likely to spend more, right? And then your debt level. If your debt level is high, you don't have money to spend. If your debt level is low, you have cash to spend. So the flip side of that, list the things you can think of that would cause people to consume less and save more. Well, it's going to be exactly the opposite, right? If my expectations are that I am going to lose my job, then I'm going to quit spending. So if my expectations are low, I'm going to quit spending as much. if I think I've only got 2 more years to work, and then after that I'm not sure, I'm probably going to quit spending as much. I'm going to start putting more away. If my taxes are high, well, clearly, again, you just don't have the money to spend. It's just not there. If the wealth or the wealth effect is low, I'm not going to spend as much. And it can't, remember, wealth isn't just how much you have, it's how much you think you need and how much you think you're going to need. So, and then finally, if my debt level is high, I'm paying money and interest that I cannot pay, that I cannot spend on myself. So, those 4 things: expectations, taxes, wealth, debt. Now, what would cause people to both spend more and save more? Well, clearly, the more income you have, the more you're going to spend, the more you're going to save. I think if I had to guess, Oprah Winfrey probably spends way more money than I'm ever going to spend, because she has it, right? She has the money to spend. And what would cause you to spend less and save less? Of course, less income. Yep. Okay, kind of self-explanatory, not a whole lot of magic going on there, but definitely worth talking about. Okay, now, here's some FRQs from the multipliers. Assume that the United States economy experiences a recession. So things are contracting, kind of like we're saying now. Further assume that Americans have a marginal propensity to save of 25%. So their marginal propensity to consume then would be 75. The propensity to save is 25, which means our spending multiplier is, there you go. The President asked the Congress to propose either a spending increase or a tax decrease to offset the effects of the recession on the economy's demand. Okay, so let's think about this for just a minute with our GDP model. Okay, if the President says, let's have a spending increase, remember, cigarettes are bad. By the way, that is an expenditure model. I was reading something else, test 3, and you kind of forgot, but this is an expenditure model. The one we've talked about is an expenditure model. Okay, so if they're asking the government to have a spending increase, they're talking about increasing the G component of our GDP, which means what? The aggregate demand is going to shift out. Which means we have more quantity and higher prices. Okay? So if we have a $50 billion increase in government spending, so think about that. What that means is the government is building roads, they're building hospitals, they're buying supplies, they're doing whatever government wants to spend their money on, but they're paying people to do those jobs. It's not like there are government workers just sitting around wishing they had something to do. So if they decide they're going to build, what is it, 50 billion. If they decide they're going to build or spend $50 billion on a new highway, let's say, then they have to get people to clear the land, they have to get people to do the construction, they have to they have to pay for the rebar, they have to pay for the concrete and the tar, and all that stuff goes into it. So this is money that's going directly into people's pockets as in the form of paychecks. So what's going to happen here is that 50 billion, and those people are going to spend their paychecks. They're going to buy new houses, new cars, whatever. That 50 billion is going straight to the hands of the people. We will multiply it straight up by the 4 spending multiplier, and we're looking at a change of 200 billion. I think I only got million there. Let's just make it easy and do that instead, okay? So it is going to have an increase. We take whatever the spending is and multiply it by our spending multiplier. So what's the impact of a 50 billion decrease in personal taxes? Okay, well this is where it gets a little weird, because if I have a tax break but I'm not feeling good about the economy, if I'm in a recession and Congress lowers my taxes, am I going to spend all that money? I don't know. It depends. Do I have a job? Do I think I'll continue to have a job? Do I think the recession is going to last long, right? For a long time? If so, I'm going to keep that cash. So what happens here is we take the 50 times the 4 for the 200 billion, but, and here's the important part, but that tax decrease is going to be more than likely less than 200 billion. Because now they're giving the consumer the option to spend or save that money. And if you're in a recession, not everybody's going to spend that money. Some people are going to hold on to that money. I know there's people that will, but the most it could do is 200 billion, but if it's a tax decrease, it's probably going to be less than the 200 billion. Why will the tax decrease have the same effect that a spend increase, or excuse me, will the tax decrease have the spend? And no, it will not. Because we don't know how the consumer will act. The most it could be would be 200 billion, but more than likely it's going to be less than that. Okay. Assume that either proposal results in the federal government incurring a budget deficit. Okay? A deficit means there's not enough money to cover that. Using a correctly labeled diagram of loanable funds, illustrate the effect on the interest rate. So here we go. Again, if you can draw your graph, just draw the graph correctly, and that means some indicator on the y-axis, some indicator on the x-axis, demand, supply, equilibrium, then you're going to get half the credit for that graph. So here we go. There's not enough money in the system, which means what's going to happen? Well, what's happening is the government then is going to be increasing the demand for loanable funds. There's not enough to go around, and that demand's going up. So our quantity shifts out, the demand, but more importantly, our interest rates shift up. Okay? That's one way you can look at it. The other way you can look at it, and why would I do it from the demand side? Because I'm saying the government is going to build those roads and pay everybody, so they're demanding money in order to pay those people. Now, the other way you could have looked at this, and either one is right, it doesn't matter. You could have said, well, wait a minute. The government is in a deficit now, so they have decreased our supply of loanable funds. Now, in that case, the quantity goes down, but what happens? The price of money still goes up. So as far as AP is concerned, they don't care which approach you take with this, because why? The outcome is the same. The interest rate, in either case, goes up. Money becomes more expensive. If the government's in a deficit, money becomes more expensive. Okay? Now, what does that mean to us? So here we go. using a correctly labeled investment demand graph. So I have investment. How do we pay for investments? With money, and the cost of money is interest. Yes. So we have a demand for investment. Okay. So what's going to happen now? We are at some, and only a demand curve, not a supply curve. We are at some equilibrium investment level and some equilibrium interest level. But now the price of money is going up because the government is in a deficit. They've either shrunk our loanable funds, or they're putting such pressure on the demand for loanable funds. Either way, they've caused interest rates to go up, they being the government. So let's just say it moves to this new point right here. What does that do to investment? Well, clearly it shifts it to the left, right? And when we're talking about investment, we're talking about individual investment. Again, the IG component of cigarettes are bad. Because think about that, you're building a new plant. You need a $40 billion loan. You don't want to pay 6% when you can pay 1%. So let's say interest rates were at 1%, you're just about ready to take that loan out, and then all of a sudden the government jumps into the market, pushes those interest rates up, and now you're like, I think I'm going to hold off a little bit on that. They'll come back down. This is a huge concept in economics, and it's called crowding out. And what it means is that the government has imposed policies whether it is taxes or spending or whatever, they have imposed policies that cause interest rates to go up and private investment to go down. And what does that matter to us? Well, again, think back. Who creates the jobs overall? I know the government can step in sometimes, but overall, individuals create the jobs. Individuals run the businesses. Entrepreneurs, corporations, those are the job creators. So if the government steps up and pushes our interest rates too high, that we can't create jobs, this could end up being a problem. Crowding out is what we're going to call that. It's a problem in the economy, or can be a problem in the economy. All right. Does the high interest rate matter to the government? Well, of course it doesn't. And it doesn't because why? They're paying it with your money. It doesn't matter how high it is. They can tax you and take care of what they need to take care of. But individual investors don't have that option. We don't have unlimited supplies of money. So if we're getting ready to make an investment and it's too expensive, we'll just pull back and wait. Okay. I've got all that written out for you. You got those notes too in case you couldn't follow what I was saying. It comes to you on the other paper also. So right now, here we go. Here's the money market. For each of the following, draw a correctly labeled graph of the market in equilibrium. And based on the scenario, determine whether a change in the supply or change in demand of money occurred. Show the effects of the change in the nominal interest rate and the quantity of money. So why does our money market graph look like this? Well, there is a finite amount of money. This is kind of like the long-term Phillips curve, right? There's a finite amount of unemployment. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through all of them. Quantity of money, interest, okay, got them all labeled, and we have demand for money, supply of money, all right, they should all look the same. Show how an increase in a bond purchase by the Fed. If the Fed is buying, Remember, buy equals putting money into our system. Would affect the nominal interest rate and the quantity of money. If the Fed is buying bonds, they're putting money in the system, which means what? We have more money in the system. Simple. Here was your equilibrium interest. And now, because there's more money, it is cheaper. How would an increase in national income affect the nominal interest rate and quantity of money? Okay, so think this through. You would think that an increase in income would affect the supply of money, but remember there's a finite amount of money, and the only people that can add the money to the system are the Fed, buying or selling bonds, right? So if incomes are going up, what are people going to do? They're going to start buying stuff. If you're getting more money, you're going to buy the car, you're going to buy the house, you're going to take the vacation, you're going to pay for your child's education. And sometimes, again, you have high expectations. Sometimes you don't have the cash, but you're like, oh, I'll take out a loan. I've got money coming in. So what that's going to do, and I'm sorry, let me get my equilibrium interest. What that's going to do is increase the demand for money. Well, again, there's a finite amount of money, so our equilibrium quantity isn't going to change because we're not the government, but our prices are going to move up. Price prime. Okay? All right. Show the impact of a decision by the private, public, and foreign sector to spend less. Well, exactly the opposite. For whatever reason, we're spending less money. Our expectations aren't as good, which means what? We're not building the house. We're not buying the car. We're not sending the kids to college. So our demand for money is now going to shift in, which means what? The price of money is going to fall. Okay? All right. So questions 2 and 3 are consumer driven. Questions 1 and 4 are government driven. Show how an increase in the required reserve ratio. So if the Federal Reserve Bank or the central bank decides to increase the required reserve ratio, that means banks can't lend out as much money. That is going to actually affect your supply of money because now they're taking money out of our system. So the supply of money is going to contract. Hang on, let me get my equilibrium quantity, my equilibrium interest. So my quantity is going to contract and my prices are going to go up. Okay? All right. And again, if you have questions that don't get answered right now, just go ahead and text them through Remind, and I'll answer them for you. All right, let's do another practice problem together. All right, for each of the following problems, determine the value of the multiplier and the dollar value of the associated change in the aggregate demand. So assume that people spend 90 cents out of every dollar they earn. So right away, you know your propensity to consume is 0.9, which means your propensity to save is 10, which means your spending multiplier, 10 will go into 100, 10 times. The real, further assume that the real interest rate decreases, and this causes gross private investment. What is gross private investment? It is this, to increase by $50 billion. Private investment. Plants are being built. Jobs are being created. What is this going to do to our aggregate demand? That means this $50 billion, is it billion? Yeah. It's going to go straight into the pockets of the people who are working, which means our change is going to be $500 billion. This is the type of growth we like to see because it's sustainable. It's what you want to see. People are working, people are buying, people are doing. If disposable per capita income increases from $50,000 to $60,000, leading to a change in consumption from 40 to 48, what would be the impact of $100 billion in government spending? Okay, so let's think that through for just a minute. They're getting $60,000, right? That's our new income level. And they are spending, they're consuming 48,000. Do we agree? Then what do we have? 12 divided by 60 is going to be your propensity to save. Everybody with me? So, I'm sorry, it's early and I haven't done math in a while. 20%. So my propensity to consume is going to be 80. My propensity to save is 20. All right, which means my my spending multiplier, 20 goes into 100 5 times. So if the government has a $100 billion increase in government spending on aggregate demand, what does that mean? New roads, new schools, they're hiring people. They're putting that money directly into people's pockets. So 100 billion times 5, it would have a $500 billion effect. Okay? If people save 5% of every dollar they earn, 5%. So my propensity to consume is 95. My propensity to save is 5. 5 goes into 100. We've got a spending multiplier of 20. What would be the impact of a $20 billion decrease in net exports? Okay, so again, I know we haven't talked about foreign exchange, but we're just going back to our GDP model, that's a D, and our prices. Okay, so if we have a decrease in net exports, right? What's happening? That means our demand, whether it's local or foreign, it doesn't matter, the demand has contracted. So we have less quantity and lower prices. But what's the impact of $20 billion? Well, think about your spending multiplier. Now I've got 20 times 20. So the impact is going to be 400 billion. And I know we haven't talked about foreign exchange, but keep in mind, if we are selling products overseas, it's still aggregate demand, exports minus imports. Okay, let's see if I want to do this one. Yes, I do. The propensity to consume is 75. The propensity to save then is 25. And our spending multiplier is 25 goes into 100 4 times. The effect of a $150 billion increase in federal taxes. What is that going to do? Well, that means now we're sending $150 billion to the government, and we don't have a choice. So that's going to pull $150 billion out of our economy. That's going to take $150 billion out of car purchases, home purchases, vacation purchases, clothing purchases, whatever. And it's going to have an effect of 4. So you're looking at $600 billion there. There's one other way we would approach this, but because we're not going into great detail, another avenue, I'm going to throw it out just to show you. I would take my propensity to consume divided by my propensity to save, right? And I come up with a factor of 3. And we would apply this in some cases to taxes, but in this case we're not. And I don't think they're going to get this deep into it with given our restricted time schedule this year. So we'll just put that on hold for a moment. Okay, people save a fifth of the change in their disposable income, which means a fifth is what? 1 divided by 5 is 20. So the propensity to consume is 80. Propensity to save is 20. We have a $500 billion increase in government spending, financed by what? A $500 billion increase in income taxes. Okay? So I know my spending multiplier is 5. And what is this going to do? Again, well, let's just take their path right now. 80 divided by 20. Because it's a tax rate, it's not going to hit your spending multiplier. We're going to do the propensity to save, consume over save. That's going to give us 4. So 4 times 500. It's going to affect us. And not in a good way. Okay. If we go straight with the spending multiplier, then it's 2,500 billion versus 200 billion. Okay. And again, I'm a little hesitant here because I'm not sure how much depth they're going to go into with the taxes and with the time frame of the class. They didn't ask a lot of questions about that before, and I can't imagine that they would do that now. Okay. You're going to need to lock in these next terms. Here we go. Monetary policies. Monetary policy is the Federal Reserve Bank. Or they will call it the central bank or the government bank. But it's always the Federal Reserve. Usually on the questions that they ask, they'll call it the central bank. So lock that in. If they ask you a question, the central bank does blah, 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 you know they're talking about the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay. They only have 2 policies. The monetary policy at their disposal is very limited. Remember, they're not like Congress. So if they're trying to fight a recession, they need to put money into our system. If they're trying to fight a recession, that means we don't have enough cash flowing through. They want to speed things up. So we call that expansionary. What will they do to put money in the system with bonds? Put is buy. They'll buy bonds. The reserve requirements, they're going to lower the reserve requirements. If banks have to hold less money, they can lend more money. Which means our money supply should increase. Bank loans should increase. And because there's more money, interest will decrease. It'll become cheaper. If money's cheaper, investment is going to increase. And if there's more money and more jobs, aggregate demand should increase. If they're trying to fight inflation, we're overheated, then they want to take money out. And this is called contraction. So what will they do with the bonds? Remember, sell is to take. They'll sell bonds. They'll take money out of the system. The Fed funds target is going to be higher. They're going to make money more expensive, and the reserve requirements are going to be higher. They're going to start tightening up. That means our money supply should decrease. Bank loans will decrease because banks just don't have the money now because they're putting it into required reserves. And if there's less money, the price of money will increase. What will that do to aggregate demand? If rates are going up, demand is going to decrease, and that means your aggregate demand's going to, if money's getting tighter, you're less likely to spend money. Please, please, please lock that in. This is the Fed. Now, who else can help us through recessions and inflation? Well, our other choice is Congress. So these are fiscal policies. Monetary policies are the Fed. Fiscal policies are Congress. Again, if they're trying to fight a recession, they're trying to put money in the system, right? It's still expansionary. And what will they do with taxes? We hope. They'll cut taxes, right? That gives us more money to spend. If we're not sending it to them, that gives us more money to spend. They're also going to increase their spending. Why? Because that puts people to work. They'll build the roads, they'll build the schools, they'll build the post office, whatever. If they're increasing their spending and decreasing their taxes, then they're going to be in a deficit. Now let's go, I'll fill out the rest in just a minute. Let's jump over to the inflationary side. Contractionary, just exactly the same. Now, if they're trying to fight inflation and slow things down, they're going to raise taxes. They're going to decrease their spending, and that puts them in a budget surplus. Does it always work that way? Of course it doesn't. I mean, just because we are in a recession doesn't mean they're going to cut our taxes. Just because we're in an inflationary period doesn't mean they're going to decrease their spending. They may or they may not, but these are the tools that they have at their disposal. All right, let's go back over to the recession side. The consumption, if there's more money in the system, if our taxes have been cut, then we should increase our consumption. We should increase government spending, and if we're doing that, aggregate demand is increasing. We agree? All right. The demand for money, as more money's in the system, it's getting cheaper, so the demand for money will go up, right? Which that demand then is going to fuel the interest rates. And that means private investment is going to start dropping. Okay? In the loanable funds market, the budget deficit, the whole cause of this, will cause our supply of loanable funds to decrease, and the demand, or as we saw in those two different graphs, the demand for loanable funds is going to increase. All right, if we are fighting inflation and they are raising taxes, then we have less money to spend. The government is decreasing their spending, which makes our aggregate demand go down. That means our demand for money is going down. If there's more money in the system, or if they can't get rid of it, the interest rates will decrease. And then what happens? Investment picks back up again. And again, go back to your business cycle, right? We go through expansionary periods, we go through troughs, we go through peaks. This all repeats. The loanable funds market, the supply of loanable funds, because there's, I'm sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. Because we have more money in the system, right? The supply of loanable funds, people aren't spending, the supply of loanable funds is going to start increasing, and the demand of loanable funds is going to be decreasing. Okay? So go ahead and draw your graph with that and think it through. But here you have, kind of in a nutshell, what they can do. The biggest questions that you're going to be asked are, you're going to get questions like, the central bank decides to cut taxes. Well, what they're really asking you, do you understand the difference between the fiscal policy, which Congress does, and the monetary policy? The central bank can't control taxes. By that same token, you might be asked, you know, in an effort to control inflation, Congress decides to buy bonds. Well, Congress can't buy bonds. Who can? The central government. Oh, are we that late? We got about 4 more minutes. So that's really what they're asking you. I want to get through the crowding out before we, how much time do I have? Yeah, I've got 4 minutes. Okay, a critique and flaw, there are different schools of thought and different economists, but one of them is Keynes. And again, this isn't going to be in the scope of the class this year, so that's why we're just kind of brushing past this. But a Keynesian policy is applied to fight a recession. And the policy of cutting taxes and raising spending. That's hard to fit in there, but anyway. So they're saying, hey, if we raise taxes and cut spending, we will start to fight this recession. We'll put more money in the people's pockets and we'll hire more people. But of course that creates in Congress a budget deficit. And to do this, Congress orders the sale of bonds. Well, be careful here, because this is not a monetary policy by the Fed. This is Congress now. So they're creating money, if you would. And this money comes from U.S. citizens and companies and investment firms. They're in the form of taxes. Or whatever you want to put into the market, you can. So money that could be, there's your key, spent on consumption or used for savings is now being used for, I don't want to put investments because you're going to think I'm talking about IG, and I'm not, to buy bonds. So this causes, our supply curve of loanable funds to shift left because there's money being taken out of the system. Okay? So what's going to happen here, and again, let me just jump down to the bottom. Because the government has issued bonds or raised taxes or increased their spending, the price of our money is going up. Which means interest rates are going up, which means private investment is going down. Private investment has been crowded out by the government. And because of the limited time, we're just going to do it with this graph here. Okay? Big, big concept. All right, listen, we've got about a minute left. So let me tell you what you should do tonight. I think on the notes I sent you, I did, instead of the supply of loanable funds going down, I did the demand going out. Either way, you get the same effect. All right, so you have common symbols that will be used. That's just for your reference. Most of them you are already familiar with. And then we've got the 2017 free response question. And there's the key to that. So if you have questions over this particular question, go ahead and text me. And you've also got the 2016 free response. And you've got the key to that. So I would work on those two tonight and then text me your questions. Tomorrow, we'll post another video tomorrow online, and that should be the last one. If not, we'll have 2 more. But either way, you can watch them at your convenience and then just text me any questions you have. Any of the assignments, I'm just going to leave to you. All right, you guys, thank you so much, and I will talk to you later. Bye.